one of the organisers for the EU Citizens Festival. And today we are here to talk about democracy in a pandemic, how it's changed, how we've had to adapt. I have some wonderful panelists here today, and I'm so excited to introduce you to all of them today. Thank you, first of all, to our panelists for being here. You know, we were talking about Zoom fatigue earlier on, so I really appreciate everyone for coming in your spare time to talk to us, because it's very, very interesting. But yes, without further ado, I will introduce you to Laura, our host for tonight, and also one of the panelists, kind of. So she'll tell you all about it. Laura?
Yeah, thank you. I think we're all panelists today. It's very much a learning experience for us to, as organisers, to learn from you guys about how you've been doing your work, how you've adapted, and what your plans for the future are. I'm the co-manager of the Young Europeans Network. We are the youth wing of the 3 Million, which is an organisation that has been campaigning for the rights of EU citizens in the UK. And of course, the pandemic has affected us. The youth wing of the 3 Million has been set up during the lockdowns, and we haven't ever met as a group all together, but we hope to soon. So yeah, the aim of this event is to talk to one another, see what you've been up to, the movements, the activism that you're a part of, and what learning experiences you can share with us. So firstly, I'll just ask you guys to introduce yourselves to the people that are viewing us on Facebook and beyond. So if you can say just like your name, what you're involved with, and yeah, anything that you want to mention about yourself, and then we'll move on to some questions that we've had. So I'll start with Marta, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm really, really happy to be here. And welcome to all our viewers and participants in the webinar. My name is Marta Kotwas. I am a doctoral student at School of Slavonic and East European Studies at UCL. So my research is about stuff that is actually closely related to what we're going to be talking about. I work on right-wing populism, protest movements, nationalism, and similar subjects. But I'm also an activist, so I am involved with this group called Dziewuchy London. Apologies for the very Polish-sounding name, but this is actually a branch of a bigger movement that appeared in Poland in 2016, and we just set up our own local branch. So I'm one of the co-funders. I've been involved in organizing all sorts of protests, mostly in front of the Polish embassy in London, but also I'm involved in all sorts of debates and talking about reproductive rights, because this is a feminist movement, and I hope I'll have a chance to say a few more things about it in a moment.
Yeah, you definitely will.
Yeah, that's it for the introduction.
Ben, would you like to say what you've been doing, what you've been up to?
Yeah, I'm a student at the University of Manchester. I'm one of the co-organisers of the University of Manchester rent strike, which at the end of last year won up to £12 million in rent rebates, and has now expanded into sort of a national rent strike movement, where we had and still do have in some unis rent strikes up to 50 campuses across the UK, and so that's mainly been withholding rent from universities until there was rent reductions given or improvements in the accommodations at universities, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah, we've been doing much better than when I was at uni trying to organise my rent strike, which did not go so well. What about you, Henry? Can you tell us a bit more about yourself, please?
Hi, yes, hi everybody. Yes, I'm Henry Lopez. I'm the General Secretary of the Independent Workers Union of Great Britain, the IWGB, which represents precarious workers and workers in the gig economy as well, like couriers, private hat drivers, Uber, delivery, and many other workers in outsourcing and different sectors like charity workers, yoga teachers, nannies, and other branches in universities. So we've been very, very busy these times, as you can imagine. Workers are having a lot of trouble because of the pandemic. I mean, our union before the pandemic. We were already fighting for workers' rights. We were already fighting for dignity, respect for workers. So this basically has been, the situation has exacerbated the problems that our members have, plus other workers. So we've been supporting and trying to help them during this pandemic and try to keep doing the work that we've been doing as well at the same time.
Yeah, I tried to organize with a union outside of the pandemic, and again, it was so hard, so I can't even imagine how it's been going right now. But I'll just, Antonio, do you want to say quickly about what you've been doing with the campaign as well, and just voter registration now?
Yes, so for those of you who don't know me already, I've been all over social media, but I am working as the main campaigner basically for the Our Home, Our Vote campaign, which is a campaign that we have launched in January, and we are able to try and get young people between the ages of 18 and 30 registered in the UK. We're focusing on EU citizens because a lot of EU citizens don't understand that they have the right to vote in local elections, so that is our main target audience. But of course, we want everybody from every background and every nationality to be able to register to vote and go out and vote in local politics. We are apolitical, so we're not encouraging you to vote for a specific person. We're just encouraging you to go out and get your voices heard. So that's kind of what we have been focusing on for the campaign. I started this campaign in January, so obviously right in the middle of the pandemic, and trying to campaign and get people mobilized and get people caring and active in politics, especially when it's all online, has definitely been a very new approach, something I'm not used to, but it's been a learning curve, and I've learned a lot from it. I think engagement can be really low because, again, we've talked about Zoom fatigue, we've talked about things like that. Trying to get people involved in the normal way has been quite difficult, but it also just makes it more innovative, and it makes you try and think outside the box and think about different strategies to get people engaged and caring and active in whatever way they can, because at the end of the day, politics is what's going to help us move on and get out of this. So voting for people and using your voices is as important as ever. And a quick plug before we move on is the registration deadline is this Monday. Please go out and make sure that you register. It takes 5 minutes. You can do it online. I'll post a link to our website, which gives lots of information about how you can do it. But yes, that's all from me.
Yeah, and another point from me is that also during the pandemic, I, like many others, have participated in mutual aid groups that have been helping vulnerable residents. And I think I'm from Brazil, and I have Italian citizenship, and throughout my time in the UK, that was probably the time that I've had most community and participation, civic engagement, where I lived in the UK. It's so hard connecting with your neighbors and feeling like you're part of a community, and that was quite valuable, being able to be in communication with my neighbors all the time, being able to help people that I didn't know, and just simply for the sake of helping when possible. And I think in many ways, I think a lot of you will present the various challenges that the pandemic has presented to democracy and organizing, but also in some other ways, it has provided so many opportunities of getting to know those that are immediately next to you physically, and being able to just the term being a good neighbor in terms of civic engagement. So in terms of the challenges, I would like to ask you guys, basically, what are the main issues that you've been working on as a campaigner or an activist, and how the pandemic and the lockdowns have affected how you've been able to continue doing your work? Yeah, if the pandemic has created a new issue for you, or simply that it's changed something that was already there. Switch it up now. Maybe I can start with Henry.
Yeah, as I was saying earlier, this pandemic has created a lot of problems for our members. As I said before the pandemic, we've been fighting to improve the conditions, fighting against outsourcing, against bad employers, and trying to get basic conditions of employment for workers in the economy, like couriers, private hire drivers who work for Uber and other operators, who have resulted. I mean, the issues that they had before during this pandemic have worsened. As you see, like many of these workers have been called heroes during the pandemic, have been clapped, have been treated as key workers. But despite that, they still not having basic conditions. They're still being exploited. Nothing has changed for them. I think in the difference, it has become more problematic. And for us as an organization, it has been very difficult because where before we had 100 cases a month, this time we have like 300. Like cleaners, for instance, they have 3 jobs. So we have problems with 3 companies, and also other workers in the union have had problems with health and safety. Some workers not having even the protections that they should have. So we have had to fight even during this pandemic. And for us, it's been very difficult because we are a union that take a direct action. We do protests, we do strikes. And for us not to be able to do that has been very, very difficult. But despite that, I mean, I think we have done a great job. Our union has grown, and we have tried to engage with members in a different way, by Zoom, by social media, using different tools. But I think we have doubled our efforts. In fact, we have even volunteers helping us. We have had to do masks for our members with volunteers to distribute to their addresses because employers wouldn't give them. And many other things. We have even had people helping people with universal credit applications when we normally don't do that. But because of the need and the lack of government support and help to these workers, we have had to do many of these things. And as I said before, we have had to be fighting during this pandemic to improve the conditions, as you have seen in social media, for couriers, for cleaners, running campaigns, because even for cleaners, for instance, outsourced workers, companies didn't even want to use the furlough. They wouldn't put them on furlough, so we have to put pressure on them. And many other problems that these workers have faced with the language barriers. And the situation has been very, very difficult for our members. So we've been doing a lot of things in order to support them.
And have you found that some of your members have been more willing to speak about certain issues? Because I guess that the pandemic has kind of made some issues like much more tangible. You can really see that the lack of protective equipment will affect you, whereas with pay, of course, we have our issues with it, but it's a lot more difficult to make a practical case for it. So I don't know if you felt that members have been more willing to speak up about the issues that are affecting their health so directly.
Yeah, I think obviously the situation has become very difficult, and many people have joined the union because there's no other way they could get support. And we have used this opportunity as a union to highlight the problems of these workers. And in fact, before this pandemic, you hear about about problems of cleaners and workers in the gig economy. But at this time, because of the problem that the pandemic has brought to these workers, this has been brought to the public eye, where now we have MPs, we have social organizations, we have many other people like seeing the job they do in society, and that's why they've been clubbed, they've been called heroes. But the government hasn't done enough for these workers. They still have to fight for the conditions. They still have to fight for pay. They still have to fight for a furlough. In the cleaners branch, for instance, we had to launch a campaign to force the government to extend furlough, to make it mandatory, because employers are not using the furlough and leaving workers without income and creating a big problem for these workers. I mean, we have use this opportunity to engage more with workers and to highlight the problems. So the more, obviously, they have been more willing to speak, because if they have no money to pay the rent, if they have no money to pay the food, if they are working in unsafe conditions, they have engaged more in this problem, and we have tried to engage them more in this, help and highlighting the problem that they have, because otherwise we see from the government when they are clapping, they are giving, they are calling them key workers, heroes. You see a different picture. But for us as an organization that represents these workers, it has been crucial to show that that's not, they don't need just a clap. They don't need just to be called heroes. They need to be protected. They need to have the protections and the rights that they deserve.
Yeah, all right. That's lots to unpack there. Maybe we can come back to some of it, but maybe like next, Ben, because as I said, like when I was at uni, we were talking about rent, we were talking about rent strikes, but with the pandemic, that's an even more complicated situation because you're paying for something that you're not even using. So how has the conversation on that been like?
Yeah, I think I agree in terms of, I think the rent strike movement probably wouldn't have been anywhere near as successful if it wasn't for the situation of the pandemic, because a lot of the issues around extortionate rent and appalling accommodation for students are issues that have existed forever. Landlords and universities alike know they can get away with monopolies on accommodation and exploit students for really poor accommodation, but the pandemic, obviously, like with a lot of issues, really tested it to its limit and really showed it up and put it into the public eye. And I think one of the things that was also really unique, I guess, about the rent strike thing was it was first of all entirely organized by first years, essentially, students who had like just got there like within a month or two and were already being forced into really poor conditions. Where we are in Manchester became the #1 COVID hotspot in the entire country because obviously if you funnel thousands of students from across the country into really cramped accommodation, there's going to be an explosion in cases, and there was, and the university didn't know how to deal with that, and locked students in and put fences up and wasn't getting food or anything like that to students. And so we had all these crises at once, but also I think for a lot of students, specifically those first years, it was sort of a first experience of that first-hand disregard by the government. Most students have grown up with austerity their entire lives, of my age at least. I was 3 last time Labour Party won an election, so most students have grown up with that their entire lives, but I think it was a very direct disregard from the government, especially in the summer having had the whole A-levels fiasco and then going straight into a university experience where it was very clear that the only interest of both the government and the university was just extracting cash from students. And that was the most important thing. Funneling those students up into that accommodation was always, any health advice, any sort of advice would have told you that was a bad idea to do it. The only reason they did do it is because they wanted the profits from that accommodation. And then later in the year we saw when students were told to go back for Christmas and then couldn't come back up, they were then being trapped out of accommodation, but there was no rent relief being given, so you were paying still thousands of pounds for a home or a flat that you couldn't return to. And I think in terms of organising, I guess that there's been a lot of issues in terms of like what we can do. There were some protests when it was like more manageable or when it's sort of allowed, and those are generally quite successful, but obviously organising protests, especially like mass protests during a pandemic, is incredibly hard, if not impossible to do. The university, etc., are very quick to call the police as soon as there's more than a couple people around, and so it's very hard to have anything like that. And so it does push you into, I guess, different strategies. What we ended up pursuing, I guess, with the Manchester rent strike at least, was going after a sort of a strategy of embarrassing the union and using that, like going after and damaging the reputation, because that's the only thing they're really receptive to, I guess. Yeah. I think, with the sort of marketization of education, so much of what you pay for is obviously just the name of the uni. And so what they're most scared of is when you start to attack that brand. And I guess every action has been more about going off that reputation more than anything, whether it's when we carried out the occupation for 2 weeks or just all the general bad media coverage that we were able to generate. I guess in that regard as well, Manchester has really been a gift in terms of the management has been a real talent for just generating really bad news stories over and over again. Like definitely would not have been successful if not for them, and they're just like general incompetence, like no need to just erect giant barrier steel fences, no one else done that. No need to just like start going on Newsnight and having car crash interviews. Like everything they done was almost entirely their fault, but a great help to the rent strike. But I think rent strike in general has managed to adapt quite well to the pandemic and sort of strategies. Social media always really important, but I think especially in the pandemic when you can't meet up, you can't use those sort of public spaces on campus like leaflet or like Canvas students, etc. It's all just online giant WhatsApp groups. But yeah, and I guess as well the social media side is something that it's very easy for students to sort of outsmart institutions like the university on. We had things like the TikTok during the rent strike, which I think had like tens and tens of thousands of followers or whatever. Like, that's a sort of platform that the university just doesn't know how to navigate or had no right of reply on, I guess. And that specifically goes after a demographic that's really important to the university, which is young people, people who are applying to that university. I think in general it was quite good to be able to use all those different platforms, which kind of just overwhelmed the university, and the university did concede in the end. And I think it was sort of a reputational investment of sort of they've been battered for so many weeks in the press and whatever, that it was just sort of trying to gain back some sort of integrity or whatever.
Yeah, I think Antonia has a follow-up question.
Yes, I do. So one of the fun things that I've found in the past that when working with young people and organizing and protests and organizing campaigns and things is that a lot of young people are feeling very disempowered because of an element of ageism that's at play. Where young people feel like they're not going to be taken seriously because many times they aren't taken seriously just because of their age. They're treated as naive and inexperienced and just not listened to. My first part of the question is, did you find that when you were organizing your campaigns? And two, how did you overcome it? And three, what kind of advice would you give to the young people that are watching today who are maybe feeling that, their voice doesn't matter, no one's going to listen to them? What kind of thing would you say to that attitude?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously easy, especially on the left in the past however many years, and especially in student politics, victories have been very rare, I guess, and it's very easy to feel like demotivated and like nothing's ever winnable. And that's certainly what we were told at the start. Our student union was completely uncooperative because they always told us that rent cuts or whatever were just completely off the table and it was unattainable or whatever. And so there was always that at the start, and I think something like a rent strike to a lot of people felt like a really radical idea, even to students who meant to be really left wing or whatever. It was quite a scary idea. There's lots of legal side of it, like ramifications of what the uni can do, etc. And an idea like that, but as soon as it caught up steam and as soon as you got that sort of critical mass of students, students really got behind it. I think what we had before the rent strike concession, what we had was that when the uni put up the fences, there was, within a couple of hours of them putting up the fences, there was thousands of students had gathered to tear them down. That was a completely spontaneous reaction. There was like no like pre-organizing involved in that. It was still like the biggest turnout we've ever had for anything. It was just completely spontaneous, which I think is probably why it was so good. But tearing that down and winning that within a couple of hours of it going up was a real galvanizing moment for a lot of students. It felt like, even though it was a very small and really insignificant victory, I mean, like tearing down the fences was good, but like no material benefit for anyone really. But it was a galvanizing moment of the fact that the students could beat the university. The entire media narrative of that was about the students beating the university very quickly. And that was, a very uplifting moment for a lot of students, and also taking that victory and using it rather than diminishing it, I think was actually more helpful, rather than just saying like that's it or whatever. Using that victory as evidence that actually it was possible to take on that multi-billion university and beat it is what got students to keep going and keep being motivated. And the week after we had the occupation, and after the second week of that occupation, the university did concede and give out £12 million in rent rebates. And I think so many groups or whatever that we'd spoken to before, so that was completely off the table, and the university had always held out about that. And what we found is, right away after we won that rent rebate, I think back in October, November time, when we were first sort of like picking up steam. There was probably us, Bristol, and one of the Scottish unis that had organised rent strikes, but there was only 3 or 4 unis with rent strikes. And as soon as we won that, within days, we had tens and tens and tens of universities across the country asking how to organise a rent strike. As soon as we had that one victory in Manchester, by Christmas, we had 50 universities. And so having that one victory and proving it was possible really allowed it to become a national campaign and allowed it to spread really well. And I think, yeah, using those moments, I think, again, we don't get a lot of victories a lot of time in student politics and on the left, but also I think one thing we can be quite bad at sometimes is not sort of celebrating those victories when we do get them, and sort of, you know, still being really pessimistic and thinking, oh, well, that's not that good, we've not solved like everything. And it's like, if you take those small victories and you keep using them and give them a bit more energy, I think that's how you get those bigger and bigger victories, and you build up more energy. And, you know, the rent strike movement, I don't think is going to go away ultimately straight away. You know, there's been lots of rent strike victories across the country now, but that sort of energy against the marketisation, against the wider issues is still there. Like we were saying about students, you know, sometimes being apathetic or whatever, so many of the students involved in rent strike, in fact, the overwhelming majority are not run-of-the-mill political students. They're not, you know, like hardened activists who've been out like campaigning, who have done loads of stuff before. Like over 90% of people on rent strike are just ordinary students who probably have never engaged with anything political before, but saw just how badly they were being treated, saw that they were forced into a corner, saw that they had nothing else to do, and you know, took that as a chance to actually take that collective action and win. And I think it's a real radicalizing moment. Like I said, it's not just been that. I think throughout the pandemic, throughout the past couple of years, students have been always the last priority of the government. And students, you know, aren't dumb. They're very aware of where they stand on that. And I think it's helped to politicize a lot of students. And I really hope that there's a lot of energy and a lot of, you know, organizing structures now that we can use going forward. I think in terms of like, yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say, yeah, let's just hear from Mart as well, like on this positive note, like that people are possibly becoming a little bit more keen to be engaged. Have you felt that that has been the case for the communities, the group that you've been working on as well? And with regards to the pandemic specifically, has it created a new problem for your group, or has it just created a problem on how you organize around an existing issue?
Well, my answer is going to be kind of twofold, because at the same time, you know, we are based here in the UK, mostly in London. We obviously address some issues that affect the Polish community. We are engaged in the debate on women's rights and reproductive rights and reproductive justice with, you know, the broad international feminist community. Within events such as the Women of the World Festival in South Bank, or Festival of Choice, or many others. But we also are essentially a part of a protest movement that is related to the situation in Poland. And I do have to say at least a couple of words about that, so that you know where it comes from. Poland is a country which has one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the European Union. Between 1993 and 2020, that was a very restrictive law already, which allowed for pregnancy terminations only in case of rape or incest, if the woman's life was in danger, or if there were very serious fetal abnormalities and very bad prospects for the pregnancy on the basis of prenatal tests. Well, since October 2020, we have a new situation in which the last premise has been also deleted, making this super restrictive law even tighter. And I mean, you have to really grasp what this means for women and for people who are pregnant and who might need abortions. You cannot terminate the pregnancy on demand. You cannot just go to the pharmacy and ask for a morning after pill over the counter because you need a prescription. If you go to a gynecologist, now at the moment, even if your pregnancy is not viable, you will not be able to legally terminate that kind of pregnancy. This situation is extremely serious, and this is, in our opinion, a violation of human rights. And we are kind of in the middle of a very dynamic process, which sort of kicked off in 2016, when for the first time in the recent years there was this very powerful initiative of tightening the law. Luckily, at that point, the protest movements that we were a part of successfully managed to basically push the parliament, and they made a U-turn as a result of the widespread strikes and protests and rallies known as the Black protests. You might have seen images from Poland, the huge protests with women with black umbrellas, and also a wave of online engagement. But since then, those kind of attempts to tighten the law were repeated a few times, and unfortunately successfully on the 23rd of October 2020, when the Constitutional Tribunal, on the request of a group of ultra-conservative Catholic MPs, ruled that the premise that I mentioned will be deleted from Polish law. So the biggest challenge, I think, that we need to notice here is related to democratic backsliding, because we have a situation when a democratic country, a country that is a member state of the European Union, is basically affected by a ruling of a tribunal that has been emasculated, that has been corrupted by the current government led by the Law and Justice Party. The Constitutional Tribunal, unfortunately, is no longer an independent institution as it should be, because of the legal meddling that this administration caused. And well, we are seeing the process, which is non-democratic. Instead of proposing a bill and passing it through the parliament, by means of voting with this kind of element of political responsibility for such a decision, we see an institution which is not independent, but is kind of acting in a way that is, in my opinion, influenced by Law and Justice and their politics, making a ruling which affects people who need abortions greatly. And this is, again, something that is very, very troubling. By means of eroding democratic institutions, something like that it took place effectively in the worst moment when there was lockdown in Poland. We knew that protesting would be very challenging, and even though the pandemic situation was quite serious, people still decided that this is a violation of their rights and took it to streets. So in October and November last year, we had mass protests. And here I need to say that maybe there is something positive associated with that. And this is, again, to do with the involvement of young people. Those protests, in particular in 2020, were at least when you look at footage on social media, when you look at videos, recordings from those events, they were dominated by young people. So there was this enormous mobilizing energy that was released at that point. People who very often took part in something like that for the first time in their lives, who were very active on social media, who were very inventive in terms of means of engagement in protest, because not everything was allowed. This is something that was absolutely fascinating, and the tenor of those protests was one of a kind. But again, you know, some bad things happened as a result as well. We can see troubling trends in terms of the use of police force, in terms of the abuse of pandemic-related regulations in order to curb any such activities. I don't know, I can give you an example of you know, people being asked to show their ID when they gather in, I don't know, in order to protest somewhere. And then police officers would say, well, I don't know if it is really your ID. You need to remove your face mask in order for me to identify you. And they would remove the face mask. And at that point, they would be fined for being in a public space without the face mask. So things that are, you know, malicious in a very obvious way. And this is something that is also kind of characteristic of this abuse of power, and you know, this is something that is very problematic. I wouldn't you know, ascribe it to individual initiative of police officers. It is something that has to be somehow expected from them. So you know, a really complicated image here from Poland. Of course, here in the UK, you know, it's a very different story, because when we wanted to organize protests and in solidarity with the protesters in Poland, we had a much more comfortable situation. You know, we were in touch with Metropolitan Police to register the rally, and everything went smoothly. We also received some advice from the Big Brother Watch in terms of, you know, the formalities that we needed to abide by, and any sort of documents, risk assessment that we needed to carry out before the events, and so on. So you know, we can say that we can here protest quite comfortably and get involved. The situation in Poland is actually a lot more serious in that respect.
Well, that's interesting, because of course the one that you mentioned has gone well enough in the UK, but recent protests, as we have seen, have not. And I think a lot of us have mentioned and have seen on social media that if this had happened in other countries, we would probably have been a lot more critical of how the democratic process of activism and protest was handled by the police. So it's interesting that, because I attended the Sarah Everard vigil as well, and two of them were like okay, and not much had happened, but so many others have gone the opposite way, and not something that we would often be accepted. I don't know if others have attended these recent protests or BLM or Sarah Everard vigils, and how your experience have been of them. Ben?
Yeah, I mean, we've had lots of vigils and Kill the Bill protests in Manchester as well, and I think, and even the protests from the rent strike going back before, I think there's definitely been a lot more. The police are fully aware they can get away with a lot more than they would have been able to in protest pre-pandemic. I think there's definitely been a sort of covert use of the pandemic rules in a lot of cases to sort of crack down on protests as much as possible, and use practices that would be completely, you know, out of order, never would have been accepted. I think before the pandemic, obviously there's always been issues with policing at protests, even in the UK, but I think there's definitely been a totally different side to it. At the vigils and at the Kill the Bill protest, I mean, in Manchester, we saw there was like a small, we had our Kill the Bill protest, and then sort of in the last couple of hours of it, there was still some people occupying the road, and I'd say there was about 80 to 100 riot police came in to arrest about 20 people who were like sitting in a road peacefully, which is just like an extortionate use of force that just never would have been seen before. I've never seen that much force used against people at a protest in the UK before, and I think it's the same that we've seen at Sarah Everard vigil, and lots of the other protests that we've seen has just been a completely disproportionate use of force by the police, knowing that they can kind of get away with justifying it in the media, and that the media is going to back them up, and that the government's going to back them up with using disproportionate powers at the moment.
What about you, Henry? Have you guys done any like actual picket lines and protests in the last year or so, or have you had to do everything online in terms of organizing?
Yeah, I think we haven't done many. We just recently had a demonstration the last week because of delivery and our fight for workers' rights. But that was the demonstration, the big demonstration that we had before. I mean, when the pandemic started, we haven't done many. We have tried to engage with workers through other ways. Like we have used petitions, we have used social media in order to do actions, because obviously there is a lot of restrictions. We also our job is to engage with people, so we also need to be careful with the COVID restrictions, with health and safety and all that comes with it. But I think it's been difficult to organize like demonstrations and strikes as we normally used to do. So obviously now that things are a bit more open, we are trying to come back, especially now with this bill, this draconian bill that they're trying to pass, which is basically very bad for workers, as this is one of the ways our members get justice. I mean, the system is a failure in terms of protecting workers, protecting health and safety, improving the condition of workers, and for us, making noise is what brings justice. That's what we are heard by employers who otherwise, turn their backs on us and want to continue exploiting workers and not giving them the conditions that they deserve. So obviously we will see how this is continuing, but we definitely are going to come out and start organizing actions.
And Marta, I was just thinking now, because and this is something that I'm very ignorant on, but please help me. I guess that before the pandemic, or I don't know how it would work, but a lot of women in Poland and other countries with restrictive reproductive systems may travel elsewhere to terminate the pregnancy. I guess the pandemic has had some effect on how much they've been able to access those services outside of their own state lines.
Absolutely, that's an excellent observation, of course. So we are actually in touch with the fabulous abortion support network that work here and work towards reproductive justice and helping people with abortions, people who need to travel, whether that's in some cases from Northern Ireland, even though the change of law took place in 2019, well, there are still sometimes some issues. They used to support women from Ireland, the Republic, before the referendum. Now they support women from Poland, Malta, Gibraltar, and other areas which are affected similarly. And as far as I understand, the situation is really very, very serious for them. And for other organizations who work in the similar field, women on the web, there are quite a few based in various EU countries. There is also the fantastic Polish abortion dream team that has, helpline and helps people, informs people how to access abortions. So you can imagine that for people who have means and time and resources to travel abroad in order to access that kind of healthcare, the pandemic is something that can be really quite disastrous in its effect. And if you kind of add to it the recent change of law in Poland, with a rapid increase of the number of people who who will need to travel abroad in order to access abortion, because it's no longer legal to carry it out in the country. Well, that means two things. One thing is that any NGOs who support them need more support and more money. So this is my little call to all of you who are interested in that issue and are willing to support it. Please donate. Get in touch with ASN and make a donation. But it also means that the inequality levels are going to be exacerbated. It will be people who are more resourceful, better informed, perhaps not relying on family members or partners. You can imagine that some women would not have that kind of support from the families, which would allow them to travel abroad. These women are in a very, very problematic situation at the moment, and this kind of even this idea that we are in the position when we're trying to help people travel abroad in order to get healthcare. This is really mind-blowing that you would need to leave your own country in order to get that. Well, not to mention that you need that kind of time, resources, and resilience, because kind of emotionally, mentally, it's also very very difficult sometimes.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. Similar, not quite similar, but is brought to my attention as well, Henry. Like a lot of domestic cleaners haven't, like there isn't even any way of enforcing the fact that they can't really be going into people's homes during the pandemic and without protective equipment. I don't know if your union has been able to support any cleaners with that, or if you had any conversation with policymakers on that issue, because I know from family members that work in that area, that has been quite difficult for them to exercise their rights and to say, no, I can't go to work in your house without any protective equipment. So how has your experience with that been?
You mean workers who work in cleaning houses? Or...
Yeah.
We haven't had many cases of people who work in houses. We recently launched our nannies and youpers branch, so we are looking forward to in regards to cleaners. We have cleaners in universities, we have cleaners in buildings around London. So most of the issues our members are facing in regards to health and safety, in some cases have been serious, like at universities like UCL, for instance. We have the university opening the campus without and calling all the workers without the need to have all the workers on site. So we've been putting pressure on the university to send workers home and to close the campus. We had, like, for instance, in one case, 9 security guards getting infected with COVID. And we have some cleaners also scared of this situation, and some of them not even receiving the protection that they should have. So most of the cases have been in regards to health and safety of workers not being given the protections. So as I said, our union has had to use volunteers in order to provide them with masks, because the employers wouldn't even give them that. And in terms of like many of them don't even speak the language, so it's been really, really difficult for them to follow the guidelines and like language.
Yeah. Okay, I guess now we can move on to the more practical steps of how you've been engaging during the pandemic. Like from my own perspective with the mutual aid group, online is not enough. A lot of the people that we were supporting were elderly, vulnerable residents that couldn't use Zoom or even a WhatsApp group. So the steps that we took to set up the mutual aid group was that we worked with a local church that helped us print like 5,000 leaflets, and we got some volunteers to distribute those leaflets to every household covering the ward that we were in, and we started receiving so many requests. Like every day I would get like 5-6 calls on we had to get a new mobile just for that, for the mutual aid group, because people were calling so much asking for help and for support. And a lot of the help that they wanted wasn't just food and picking up the prescription, was getting someone to go on a walk with them, or getting someone to come to the window and having a chat, because their family members were all over the country, were not close to them. And that was quite essential. And I know that from that, so many new relationships have been formed in the community, where people still meet up regularly in a safe way, but have created friendships. And as I said, like, I think in a way that has been so important to me during the pandemic, that something that I had never experienced in the UK myself, of being like feeling like I was really part of a group, of a local area that I was in. But I guess with your situation, Martin, what the protests that are happening, you're trying to support something that's happening elsewhere. And although I guess like the protest that you've got done outside of the embassy is one thing that can be done, but what else have you guys been up to that has shown support for the women that are protesting in Poland?
So there is definitely this element that you have mentioned, Lara, this element of the need of the community to do something. We have, I mean, every time there is something happening in Poland, there's yet another attempt to change the law. We have an influx of followers on our social media channels, and there are moments when people just want to get out and shout out their anger. And this is the specificity of social movements based on protest, that it is very much relying on the momentum, on the dynamics of the events as they are unfolding, and people would want to get engaged and involved in I don't know, attending a rally or something like that at this particular moment in time. So on one hand, in terms of addressing the needs of the Polish community or feminist community in London, our role was to enable that, but also do it safely. So the last protest we organized was, I think, on the 13th of December, so a week before the lockdown was introduced. And then we really try very hard to make sure that everyone is safe, that whoever wanted to attend is able to, but at the same time that people are socially distant. We had supplies of hand sanitizer and stuff like that. So we slightly changed the format, kind of tweaked the format of the event so that actually the spacing is something that contributes to it rather than prevents people from engaging. So that was one thing. But of course, in terms of expressing our support and disseminating information, what we do here is mostly online activism. So it varies from writing to our MPs, writing letters to MEPs and our representatives in Brussels, and lobbying with all sorts of institutions so that the EU authorities get interested. And there was actually some involvement on the side of the European Parliament. But, of course, we kind of need to inform, we feel we need to inform the British public of what is happening. One fantastic initiative was done by a group of our friends from another activist group who have called themselves Tell Someone About Poland. I very much encourage you to follow them on Instagram because they've been doing those kind of guerrilla actions, projecting images, videos onto various buildings in London, including Tate Modern, including Madame Tussauds, of course, also the building of the Polish embassy, and this way kind of getting the message out. And you know, because all of that is then filmed and posted on social media, and that you know, that is then passed on to our Polish friends. And we do get signals that, you know, every sign of involvement and support from abroad is something that is very much cherished and appreciated by Polish activists. I mean, it was a very intense period of protests, late October, November, up till, you know, mid-December. People were really, really exhausted. So any kind of spark of solidarity is something that that they really, really appreciated.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, Ben? Like, of course, most students are online and are on social media, but so much of a part of university life and spreading messages is at the club or the common room at your college, university, the cafeteria, just being able to put a poster up and something like that. So, and I know you mentioned TikTok as well, and I guess for a lot of university students, Facebook's kind of dead as well. Don't know how you've been communicating the message, how you've been getting people together.
Yeah, I mean, we've absolutely tried to use as many platforms as possible. I think that's always the best route rather than just going for one. Like, you're always better off trying as much as possible. And so we did use, you know, we did do a little bit of traditional like leafleting and like flyering all over campus and, you know, putting posters up. And I think that's good. More, I don't think we got many people like involved through there, but like covering the campus in like posters and that is good in terms of creating a sort of atmosphere, I guess, and a sort of a public presence, and just making people known that you're there, and, you know, yeah, making that campus feel like it's really alive with activism and that there's stuff going on. And the most people we do get engaged was just through social media. But actually, one thing, you know, that was really useful, and I guess we don't use a lot all the time in like sort of student activism, is just giant WhatsApp groups and just like sending links around, and just getting sort of all of the organizing is sort of that we had was sort of friend of a friend sort of thing, where you just got people to get their friends to join in on the rent strike. And I think that's what's was really good about it, and the fact that it was entirely organized by people involved rather than like, I don't know, like the Labour Party or like any other like larger group or outside group kind of coming in and organizing it for students. The fact that it was organic and organized by students themselves definitely helps to win that trust over as well. You know, students are a lot more trusting if it's people they know saying come and join this cause and come and join this strike, etc., rather than some random person they've met at Freshers' Fair or whatever. And I think that was really good. And yeah, obviously dominating social media as much and just having that really constant and overwhelming presence on social media, so that it was like inescapable for anyone at the university not to see that stuff on their feed at least once a day, if not more. And also, I mean, we found for us, and I think something that doesn't always happen, was sort of having that media support was really good. You know, a lot of the time media are quite dismissive of students, I guess, and would just kind of cast it off as fringe extremist student politics or something. But having that media support definitely helps to get it out to the wider public, and also to make the university really feel like they were on their own. And like a lot of the time the media would help the university in sort of dismissing student concerns or whatever.
I guess the A-levels issue has kind of helped with that, because it created this whole conversation about students.
I think I guess the sort of being locked out of accommodation and paying for rent that you couldn't access was something that was just so unjustifiable that the press had to back it. But also I think I don't know, like we've tried to think about it, like why did we have, like, even the Daily Mail and the Spectator and the Daily Express writing up positive stories about student activists, like that never happens.
Yeah.
And we tried to like figure out why that was. I think there's a lot of reasons, that possible reasons why. I don't know exactly what it was. But I think definitely also engaging with the narrative of the pandemic definitely helped. You know, it's something that everyone was experiencing at once. A lot of the time, sort of student experience are very othered and sort of like they're just annoyed at something that doesn't affect anyone else. And I guess the pandemic was a very collective experience for everyone, and something that sort of made it a lot more relatable for everyone, even if you are like a middle-aged editor at the Daily Mail or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I can't actually remember what the question was, but
No, just generally how you've been communicating your
Yeah.
message, which you covered. But yeah, I think that's right. Like anyone that has a child in university will also think, why am I paying for
yeah,
my son, daughter to use a room that
yeah.
they're not in?
So much of it's personal. I think even we had one of the first big bits of media stuff that we got was from like Good Morning Britain, and that was just because like Piers Morgan's son had seen it and like sent it to his dad. So like even like really personal stuff like that, I guess, does have an impact.
Yeah. What about you, Henry? Like I think the pandemic has probably made it worse, but a lot of people that are already the members that you're trying to reach are already in situations where they're not necessarily checking the common social media platforms that are used to talk about certain political messages. I know that when I was working as an office cleaner in London, we didn't know. I have a lot. Everyone was South American and had no idea what trade unions were or how to do things. So how have you always been approaching people in this kind of precarious working conditions, and especially now during the pandemic?
Well, I guess it depends of the workers that we represent. Because as I said, we have at the moment 12 branches, which include foster carers, include private health drivers, include couriers who before these people work, they don't work in a workplace. So we kind of have experience of how to organize this work because they are so dispersed in different workplaces. But during this pandemic, I guess, like in terms of cleaners and workers in universities, we have used the tools of any tools that have been useful for us, like WhatsApp groups, like Zoom, social media, and in fact, like the fact that workers have been at home, like having nothing to do because they've been on furlough, for instance, and loads of our members. We have used this time to engage in conversations way more deeply than before. Like before, we would just see them from time to time, whereas now, like we try to use that time to engage with them in conversations, like sending them questionnaires, but also like working with other organizations that is supporting them has been useful because it's for instance, we have worked with London Renters Union, like Laws, which helps Latin American women's with settle and even trillion in terms of helping them with their applications for the settled status, because we represent a lot of our members come from Europe, have Spanish passport, for instance, because they come from Spain, they have EU citizenship. So we've been working with these organizations in order to engage them more as well, because the pandemic has and Brexit as well has become very problematic for them in terms of accessing the system. The pandemic before, like we used to meet, like for instance in Elephant Castle, we had like for the cleaners, we had a space where we used to meet and organize events, workshops, and help them with the applications, for instance, for settled status. Whereas now, by being by not being able to meet, it became more difficult because many of these workers don't speak the language. So it's been just trying to combine all that and help them in many ways. Not just we organize workers and represent them when they have problems at work and in terms of improving their conditions. But because the pandemic has exacerbated their problems, we have been able to we have had to support them in different ways, and these have been useful to engage them as well in the union.
Yeah, I feel that a lot. As I said, like I'm from Brazil, and my grandmother goes to like the Brazilian church here in London, and that's like such an important way for them to share information and just tell one another what's happening. And I always thought that when I came back to London from uni, I would be able to go there and like help with settled status applications as well, but I haven't, so I can only do online stuff so far. But I guess this brings us to kind of like closing the event, thinking about what next. So just pass it on to Antonia. I think she's got a question from Facebook as well.
Yes, so we have a question from Neil, which is one question that we should all be asking ourselves is, what have we learned in the last 12 months? And I'll add to that a little bit as well. What have we learned in the last 12 months from, COVID, in terms of, how we've managed and adapted with campaigning, with voting, with protesting, with getting all out there, and how do we take what we've learned in this last month, last year of COVID. I wish it was a month. And how do we take that to, what's going to be happening next, when the pandemic is over? How can we use the things that we have learned in this last year to progress and to continue campaigning in the future? So I'll start off with Marta, and then we'll ask everybody.
That's an excellent question. I think we have. I think one of the most valuable lessons is that politics matters, and that on the one hand, you can be on the receiving end of something that is a result of a political decision of people whom you did not vote for because you didn't bother voting at all. And this is something that might have occurred to quite a lot of people in Poland, especially young people. As we know, voter turnout among the youngest cohorts is always the lowest. With these events unfolding since October 2020, and with such an immense engagement on the part of young people, from things that are, serious, like organizing and attending protests for many, many days, to things that are actually very kind of minute and happen on a very kind of personal level. Like, for example, for students, some of whom are quite young, like, I don't know, secondary school students, swapping their profile picture on Teams or Zoom with one, with a little logo with the red lightning bolt, which has become the symbol of the protest. Something that allows you to identify as a supporter of this movement. Doing that sort of publicly, but in your close community, already makes you involved in a certain way. And some people would have consequences for performing such gestures. There were all sorts of stories disseminated on social media on, students being told off by the teachers, or I don't know, students being persecuted by local authorities, by, I don't know, whoever did not like the fact that they organized a small protest. They set up a Facebook event and 15 people gathered, and then, they end up facing some consequences for that action. So, experiencing how big politics that is happening in the capital of your country, it can actually matter for you personally, and how you can also get involved is something that I think this pandemic has really exacerbated. And it is something for us to really bear in mind when it all gets better, when we all can relax, when we all can go to beer gardens and have a pint and just chill, that this is not really changing the fact that our political choices are really, really important and matter and influence our lives very much. Can really cause very upsetting situations.
Yeah, very good, very good. Just like those politics matter, those slogans, I think it's become so much more like it's important right now. Is if we don't talk about it, like with EU citizens as well, voting rights is all up for negotiation at the moment. We're not 100% sure the voting rights will be maintained in the future. So things like that, voting right now is like, we need to show that we care. So I guess, Henry, should I come next, and then I'll come to Ben?
Yeah, for us, in what we do, I think, but I just it's for everybody. I mean, what we have learned is the word of solidarity, and why solidarity is important. You have seen that the government is not going to change anything for us. Not even, they haven't done during this pandemic, let alone in normal days. So that's why it's important to get organized. No matter which industry you work, we all need to stick together. We all need to join a union. We all need to be involved in organizing, because that's the only way we can change things. We have shown time and time again that by organizing, we can win and we can improve our conditions. It might be universities, might be for cleaners, for private health drivers, for any workers. You see workers out there now striking for because they want to keep their jobs, because employers are not using the help of the government in order to support them. They just don't care about the workers. They just want to leave the workers abandoned during these most difficult times. And that's why I think it's very important. And I think learning from this, we need to, once we get out there and we are able to live a normal life, we should work more closely together as organizations. We have shown that at these times, like for us, like we've been working with many organizations that before we wouldn't be working, but because of the problems that we face, this has been a must thing to do. I mean, we have had many organizations calling us to come and speak about workers' rights, because they're also facing this problem. You see now teachers being offered 0-hour contracts, where before there wasn't this problem. This was not an issue. Now you have, as I said, academics being put on worse contracts, because now they can record something in Zoom and they can present their lecture, and that's what the universities are trying to do. So now it's not a problem just for cleaners, it's not a problem just for security guards in the universities, for instance, but it's becoming a big problem for even academics. So that's why it's important to stick together and keep fighting in order to improve their conditions for everybody.
Yeah, 100%. I think we've been doing a lot of trying to work with other organizations so that the message can get to anyone that's willing to listen to us and get registered to vote, apply for the settlement scheme, campaign for your reproductive rights, campaign for your rights as a student. There's so much for us to collaborate on. So I guess finally over to you, Ben. What have been your key learning points and what else for the campaign?
Yeah, I think sort of wider overall, I think definitely the pandemic has put like a spotlight and a sort of lightning bolt moment on a lot of these issues. Whether it's the appalling rent, and not just for students but in general, that a lot of people have really struggled with rent during the pandemic, whether it was working conditions or the free school meal stuff, or NHS staff asking for pay rises, all these issues that have really generated a lot of traction and generated a lot of empathy from the wider public, from people who maybe weren't always super aware of them beforehand. It's about continuing that. Like, all of these issues existed before the pandemic, and they'll definitely exist after the pandemic, and it's really important we don't lose that energy and that focus that we've managed to garner for a lot of these issues, and making sure that just because the pandemic really tested a lot of these to their limits and really shone an extra light on them, that we don't just give up that struggle as soon as the pandemic ends. I think that's a slight worry of mine, but I think if we organise and we keep pushing for it effectively, we can make sure that it doesn't sort of drop off. And I think also just remembering always that these groups and these institutions are absolutely beatable. Like, I think people do need to be in general a lot more optimistic. There have been wins during this pandemic. Going back to stuff like the free school meals and stuff like that, people were able to fight back and did win on those issues. And I think it can be really dispiriting maybe sometimes, when you've got a government with a majority as big as it is that can just sort of pass legislation as it wants a lot of the time, to think that it's impossible to win anything against institutions that strong. But it absolutely is. And I think community organising especially has been really important. a lot of the time, you know, when you have got sort of parliamentary majorities that big, sometimes some of the organising does have to be done absolutely outside of Parliament, and can be just as successful, if not more, in getting those victories. I think that's something to bear in mind always going forward, is how much we can win within our communities. And those local victories also, you know, can seem quite small, but are also some of the ones that have the biggest impact on people's day-to-day lives, are those small local victories in their communities or in their workplace.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, that's right. We'll continue, like, this is with our campaign as well. This is just the first step, and getting more people registered. This last weekend, just last Thursday and Friday, we actually went to Northampton, Corby and Peterborough to register people to vote, and that's just the first step, getting them more engaged in the future, letting them know more about UK politics, and same thing with students. Slowly we getting more people to find out about their rights and how to campaign in the UK, how to get involved with their issues. So thank you so much for speaking to us today. We've got like some viewers on Facebook that hi from Facebook, and it will be uploaded to YouTube as well, so anyone can watch afterwards. So just a final reminder that the deadline to register to vote is the 19th of April, and you can apply for a postal vote until the 20th of April, and you vote on the 6th of May. So thank you so much for coming, everyone, and we'll catch up with you soon.